Hey, sixth graders. Today is Wednesday, so it's not technically the first day of distance learning. So tomorrow, Thursday, the 12th, is also my daughter's 15th birthday. So it all ties together. But that's the first day of distance learning. Today is a normal Wednesday where you're going to check in. I got some first chapter reading for you. You're going to answer a quick question, and then it's just a really light day. So Thursday, cohort A, you and I are going to Zoom. Thursday, cohort B, you guys are going to go online and go through the steps like you normally do when you're not here. Friday, cohort B, we're Zooming. And cohort A, you're going through everything else. So let's just keep that schedule. Run through your schedule and do it no matter what day it is. So if it's Monday or a Thursday, cohort A, you got your Zoom schedule. Guess what? Cohort B, do the same thing. So like at 8:45, go to your advisory. At 9:15, boom, go to your first class, that kind of thing. So, all right, today, the first chapter Wednesday, I'm going to read this. It's called Walk Two Moons. The author is Sharon Creech, and that is her. A little bit about Sharon Creech. She's a woman who found out in life that she was part Native American. And so you'll see in her stories quite a bit of like Native American stories and Native American representation. And this story is very much full of that. This right here is a map. You see that blue line? That's a journey. So her main character is Salamanca Tree Hiddle. And in this story, Salamanca is on a journey to get to her mother. And so here's the thing. I'm going to say that Walk Two Moons is a really cool story of a character's journey. If you remember So Be It, this is a little bit like that. Only this is the story is the journey, and the characters really run through Salamanca, and this is what heroes do. They go on journeys and stuff happens and they experience things, and that's what's going on in this one. She goes from Kentucky all the way out west, essentially to right around Yellowstone National Park. So I'm going to read the first couple pages. You're going to decide whether you want to read it. I recommend it highly. This book is phenomenal. This is about who we are, and the main character is a rich mix of kid and Native American and daughter. So really a powerful story. Here we go. The face at the window. Okay. Gramps says that I am a country girl at heart, and that is true. I have lived most of my 13 years in Bybanks, Kentucky, which is not much more than a caboodle of houses roosting in a green spot alongside the Ohio River. Just over a year ago, my father plucked me up like a weed and took me and all our belongings. No, that is not true. He did not bring the chestnut tree, the willow, the maple, the hayloft, or the swimming hole, which all belonged to me. And we drove 300 miles straight north and stopped in front of a house in Euclid, Ohio. No trees? I said. This is where we're going to live? No, my father said. This is Margaret's house. The front door of the house opened and a lady with wild red hair stood there. I looked up and down the street. The houses were all jammed together like a row of birdhouses. In front of each house was a tiny square of grass, and in front of that was a thin gray sidewalk running alongside a gray road. Where's the barn? I asked. The river, the swimming hole. Oh, Sal, my father said. Come on, there's Margaret. He waved to the lady at the door. The lady with the we have to go back. I forgot something. The lady with the wild red hair opened the door and came out onto the porch. In the back of my closet, I said, under the floorboards. I put something there and I've got to have it. Don't be a goose. Come and see, Margaret. You can kind of see what's going on here, right? She's moving to a new place that sounds like the suburbs, jammed together houses, sidewalk, road, and she's used to wide open swimming holes and barns and fields. She calls a tiny square of grass for a yard. She's not used to that. I did not want to see Margaret. I stood there looking around, and that's when I saw the face pressed up against an upstairs window next door. It was a round girl's face, and it looked afraid. I didn't know it then, but that face belonged to Phoebe Winterbottom, a girl who had a powerful imagination, who would become my friend, and who would have many peculiar things happen to her. Not long ago, when I was locked in a car with my grandparents for 6 days, I told them the story of Phoebe, and when I finished telling them, or maybe Even as I was telling them, I realized that the story of Phoebe was like the plaster wall in our old house in Bybanks, Kentucky. My father started chipping away at a plaster wall in the living room of our house in Bybanks shortly after my mother left us one April morning. Our house was an old farmhouse that my parents had been restoring room by room. Each night, as he waited to hear from my mother, he chipped away at that wall. On the night that we got the bad news that she was not returning, he pounded and pounded on that wall with a chisel and a hammer. At 2 o'clock in the morning, he came up to my room. I was not asleep. He led me downstairs and showed me what he had found. Hidden behind the wall was a brick fireplace. The reason that Phoebe's story reminds me of that plaster wall and the hidden fireplace is that beneath Phoebe's story was another one, mine. So this is a little bit of a mystery. That's one of the fun things about this story is you don't quite know what's going on until you know what's going on. And since we're moving into kind of a different idea, think about what the author did right here, right? That whole first little chapter, that was a flashback. The story's over for the author or for the narrator, but we're about to hear that story. And so that was the narrator / author's way of sort of getting us interested in the story. 2, the Chickabiddy starts a story. It was after all the adventures of Phoebe that my grandparents came up with a plan to drive from Kentucky to Ohio, where they would pick me up, and then the three of us would drive 2,000 miles west to Lewiston, Idaho. That is how I came to be locked in a car with them for nearly a week. It was not a trip that I was eager to take, but it was one that I had to take. Gramps had said, "We'll see the whole ding-dong country." Gramps squeezed my cheeks and said, "This trip will give me a chance to be with my favorite Chickabiddy again." I am, by the way, their only Chickabiddy. My father said that Graham couldn't read maps worth a hill of beans, and that he was grateful that I had agreed to go along and help them find their way. I was only 13, and although I did have a way with maps, it was not really because of that skill that I was going, nor was it to see the whole ding-dang country that Grams were going. The real reasons were buried beneath piles and piles of unsaid things. Some of the real reasons were Graham and Gramps wanted to see Mama, who was resting peacefully in Lewiston, Idaho. Graham and Gramps knew that I wanted to see Mama, but that I was afraid to. Dad wanted to be alone with the red-headed Margaret cadaver. He had already seen Mama, and he had not taken me. Also, although this wasn't as important, Dad did not trust Graham and Gramps to behave themselves along the way unless they had me with them. Dad said that if they tried to go on their own, he would save everyone a lot of time and embarrassment by calling the police and having them arrested before they even left the driveway. It might sound a bit extreme for a man to call the police on his own tottery old parents, but when my grandparents got in a car, trouble just naturally followed them like a filly trailing behind a mare. So a filly is a horse and a mare is another horse. One would be the younger one to the older one. My grandparents' Hiddle were my father's parents, full up to the tops of their heads with goodness and sweetness, and mixed in with all that goodness and sweetness was a large dash of peculiarity. This combination made them interesting to know, but you could never predict what they would do or say. Once it was settled that the three of us would go, the journey took on an alarming, expanding need to hurry that was like a walloping great thundercloud assembling around me. During the week before we left, the sound of the wind was, "Hurry, hurry, hurry," and at night even the silent darkness whispered, "Rush, rush, rush." I did not think we would ever leave, and yet I did not want to leave. I did not really expect to survive the trip. But I had decided to go, and I would go, and I had been there, and I had to be there by my mother's birthday. This was extremely important. I believed that if there was any chance to bring my mother back home, it would happen on her birthday. If I had said this aloud to my father or to my grandparents, they would have said that I might as well try to catch a fish in the air. So I did not say it aloud. But I believed it. Sometimes I'm as ornery and stubborn as an old donkey. My father says I lean on broken reeds and will get a face full of swamp mud one day. My father says I lean on broken reeds and will get a face full of swamp mud one day. You're going to hear a lot of these phrases. They're like old phrases, or they're from the country. They're people who like have ways of saying things or messages, but they say them in like ways that connect them to like the environment. When at last Graham and Gramps Hiddle and I set out that first day of the trip, I prayed for the first 30 minutes solid. I prayed that we would not be in an accident. I was terrified of cars and buses, and that we would get there by my mother's birthday, 7 days away, and that we would bring her home. Over and over, I prayed the same thing. I prayed to trees. This was easier than praying directly to God. There was nearly always a tree nearby. As we pulled onto the Ohio Turnpike, which is the flattest, straightest piece of road in God's whole creation, Graham interrupted my prayers. Salamanca. I should explain right off that my real name is Salamanca Tree Hiddle. Salamanca, my parents thought, was the name of the Indian tribe to which my great-great-grandmother belonged. My parents were mistaken. The name of the tribe was Seneca, but since my parents did not discover their error until I was born, and they were by then used to my name, it remained Salamanca. My middle name, Tree, comes from your basic tree, a thing of such beauty to my mother that she made it part of my name. She wanted to be more specific and use Sugar Maple Tree, her very favorite, but Salamanca Sugar Maple Tree Hiddle was a bit much for even her. My mother used to call me Salamanca, but after she left, only my grandparents Hiddle called me Salamanca, when they were not calling me Chickabiddy. To most other people, I was Sal, and to a few boys who thought they were especially amusing, I was Salamander. In the car, as we started our long journey to Lewiston, Idaho, my grandmother Hiddle said, Salamanca, why don't you entertain us? What sort of thing do you have in mind? Gramps said, how about a story? Spin us a yarn. A yarn is another word for a story, an old word. I certainly do know heaps of stories, but I learned most of them from Gramps. Graham suggested I tell one about my mother that I could not do. I had just reached the point where I could stop thinking about her every minute of every day. Gramps said, well then, what about your friends? You got any tales to tell about them? Instantly, Phoebe Winterbottom came to mind. There was certainly a hog's belly full of things to tell about her. I could tell you an extensively strange story, I warned. Oh, good, Graham said. Delicious. And that is how I happen to suspend my tree prayers and tell them about Phoebe Winterbottom, her disappearing mother, and the lunatic. All right. If I can't get you interested in that story, I don't know how to do it. So there you go. Hopefully you want to read it. It's a phenomenal book, and it's like a mystery, and it's very real. I will say this: it's a very powerful ending. So there's definitely a very emotional climax to the story. All right, everyone, enjoy the story, and make sure you answer some questions so I get you thinking, and then we'll see you all on Thursday.